Let's continue this discussion because the future of OpenAI is uncertain after its board ousted founder and CEO Sam Altman. Now the employees are threatening to jump ship to Microsoft. Our next guest is Altman's future at Microsoft has some real upside for the tech giant. With us now is Fred Havemeyer. He is Macquarie lead software equity research analyst. Fred, you just heard us talking about this. We don't even know if one moment to the next, if indeed Altman is going to end up at Microsoft. As somebody who's trying to analyze this company and its future profits, just give us, first of all, a little color on how you're following all this and sort of analyzing it in real time.
Well, following and analyzing in real time is actually very accurate, because I think I was publishing at around 4 a.m. last night when the news was coming out that Microsoft was hiring Sam Altman as CEO of a new AI venture, as Satya Nadella published on X and or Twitter. So the way that I'm thinking about it is that right now, I think Satya has essentially pulled off a coup that I have not seen the likes of before in the tech market. He's pulled in and brought in Sam Altman, CEO of, as we've all been talking about here, CEO of OpenAI, and one of the clear visionaries in the entire generative AI landscape right now. And also, of course, someone who has been leading the commercialization push within OpenAI. And following that, we've heard the news that now the majority of engineers at OpenAI are considering leaving the company and potentially moving over to Microsoft, which appears to be ready to welcome them with open arms. So I think in the range of outcomes here, we see either an opportunity where Microsoft ends up consolidating and essentially acquiring OpenAI without actually having to tender any sort of acquisition under the present scenario where Sam Altman is running as CEO this own AI venture within Microsoft. In a second scenario, even if we go a route where Sam Altman returns to OpenAI, I think Microsoft would continue to benefit. We would see continued commercialization, likely of models, and an emphasis on shipping product, which, if you recall back with the Microsoft partnership, OpenAI has delivered to Microsoft a licensing agreement that gives Microsoft access to every large language model and AI model that OpenAI produces, up to what the board defines as artificial general intelligence. So it's a scenario where I think Satya played everything very well. I think that overall just reinforces our view that Microsoft is the top pick in the generative AI landscape for us.
But Fred, let me ask you this, though. Microsoft at the same time, it has this big stake in OpenAI, right? And it was valued, I think, Fred, at something like $86 billion. But now we're in this state, we don't know what OpenAI is worth. How should investors, how are financial analysts thinking about that?
I think when we consider what has that partnership to begin with, part of it has been cash and part of it has been compute credits on Azure. So if we think about this partnership in general, it's in one that's benefited Microsoft also through its commercialization of OpenAI, such that if we look at the last quarter, we estimated that Microsoft was operating in Azure at about a $1.6 billion run rate for its generative AI related services. So with the amount of revenue that Microsoft is generating through existing Copilot solutions, in addition to the commercialization of things like OpenAI hosted on Azure through this licensing agreement, we think there's still tremendous value here. Whether or not OpenAI remains an independent, commercialized, and really border-pushing tech company, or whether this ultimately is internalized within Microsoft as its own AI venture, we continue to think that they win.
And the title of your note on this was, "If you come at the king, you best not miss," referring to Sam Altman. What is it about this guy, Fred, that is so magical, seemingly, that nobody wants him to leave, everybody wants him? Is he really so bound up here in the future of AI?
So I think when considering what Sam Altman brings to the table, it's been a consistent vision towards what the future could be in terms of developing, commercializing generative AI. I think Sam Altman has been shown to just have a very keen business mind that is able to synthesize just a very complex technology and topics and convey it and do the storytelling in a way that makes sense to both investors as well as those teams that he is building. And I think the team building part is actually one of the most critical aspects to discuss here. One of the reasons that the engineers and teams at OpenAI appear so ready to join him is, from just what we've been hearing, the general loyalty that he inspires among the teams that he's been building, cultivating, and also pushing in many ways to produce the best technology possible. I think that's been one consistent refrain, is that Sam Altman always tends to push those that he's working with to continue that acceleration towards developing something new, disrupting something new, and delivering just category-defining products.
And Fred, talking about Microsoft as well, listen, you're a bull, you got to buy on the name. It has surged this year, Fred, so we're up about 60% here. What are the catalysts ahead, Fred, that you think moves Microsoft higher? And do you, even with that surge, you obviously still think valuation's attractive?
Oh, I definitely think valuation is attractive here. So the way I'm thinking about Microsoft in general is when I look at the opportunity ahead in the generative AI landscape, I tend to think that we are just at the very early stages of what this market might offer. So even though I quoted a number about $1.6 billion of annualized revenue in Azure related to AI services, I would note that that's up, we estimate, about almost 3 times quarter over quarter on a run rate basis. So this is, despite being early stages, something that's growing very quickly, and something that's, as Microsoft called out, driving growth for Azure through the balance of this year. And we think that is something that is at this very early stage, with enterprises still beginning to experiment with how to bring generative AI into their companies. Something that we're very excited about, and we think will continue to drive long-term momentum in this stock.
Fred, I got to ask what this means for everybody else, right? Has the picture changed? And I know you don't cover it directly, but has the picture changed over the weekend for an Alphabet or for a Meta, or for that matter, for something like a Salesforce, which you do cover? Or is this, because it's sort of still Microsoft, it doesn't really change the equation for others?
So I think that what we may see, and this will depend, of course, on where things shake out, because I think all of us have seen the headlines are moving in real time as we speak. But I think it will depend ultimately on where the talent at OpenAI ends up. I think if the talent remains consolidated within OpenAI, or perhaps within Microsoft, we may see a continuation of the just commercialization of generative AI technologies within Microsoft that's similar to the present environment. I think generally there's likely a number of companies that are thinking about their counterparty risk right now, and what things might look like if suddenly most engineers at OpenAI were to leave. We took a look at it through the example of ChatGPT. Can that, for example, be sustained on a skeleton shift of engineers potentially keeping that up and running? So I think in general, it will depend on where the OpenAI engineers remain. Likely, if Microsoft is able to build out its own expertise with, for example, hiring OpenAI engineers, then I think Google would have a potentially very difficult competitive landscape in front of it, where its own DeepMind organization would now face not just OpenAI, but the consolidated OpenAI within Microsoft that unlocks the entire Microsoft balance sheet, potentially for future innovation and development built on top of Azure. I think if we think more broadly in the landscape, Meta has had this open source large language model approach, and it's unlikely things would change around that strategy there. But in terms of the giants that are commercializing, I think that it could be very beneficial for Microsoft. Once again, just it depends on whether or not the engineers end up in Microsoft, OpenAI, or elsewhere.
All right.
We think
that's the question we're all going to keep watching, Fred. Fred Havemeyer from Macquarie, thank you so much for your time and your insight today, Fred. That was great.
Thank you.